What happens when one of the world's most powerful tech billionaires sits down for what should be a routine talk show interview, only to find himself facing the most hostile questioning of his career? The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife as Bill Gates settled into the guest chair across from Stephen Colbert. What started as standard promotional banter quickly devolved into something much darker, and by the end of this encounter, security would be called, and a billionaire would storm off set in front of a live studio audience. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with your thoughts on celebrity interviews gone wrong. Trust me, you're going to want to share your reaction to this one. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was supposed to be a safe space for Gates. His publicist had specifically chosen this appearance because Colbert was known for his softball questions with tech executives. The Microsoft founder had a new book to promote about climate change innovation, and this was meant to be 20 minutes of friendly conversation to boost sales. The audience was primed, the cameras were rolling, and everything seemed perfectly normal as the band finished their opening number. But something was different about Colbert that night. Maybe it was the mounting criticism he had been receiving about being too easy on powerful guests, or perhaps it was the stack of research papers his producers had placed on his desk earlier that day. Whatever the reason, the host came out swinging. From the very first question, abandoning his prepared script entirely. "So, Bill, let's talk about your foundation's investments in pharmaceutical companies," Colbert began, his trademark smile notably absent. "Isn't it convenient that you're pushing vaccines while simultaneously profiting from the companies that make them?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Gates shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly caught off guard by the aggressive tone. This wasn't the gentle setup question he was expecting about his charitable work. "Well, Stephen, that's not quite accurate," Gates replied, attempting to maintain his composure while his media training kicked in. "The foundation operates independently from any personal investments, and our primary concern is global health outcomes." But Colbert wasn't buying the rehearsed response. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he prepared his follow-up attack. "Independent? Really?" Colbert's voice dripped with skepticism. "Because according to these documents, your foundation has given grants to organizations that then purchase products from companies where you hold significant stock positions. Isn't that just money laundering with extra steps?" The audience fell, silent, sensing the shift in energy. This wasn't the playful comedy they had come to expect from late-night television. Gates's face flushed red as he struggled to find words. His handlers in the wings were frantically signaling to the producers, but Colbert had clearly gone rogue. "I find it interesting that you would make such serious accusations without understanding the complexity of global health initiatives," Gates shot back, his voice rising slightly. The billionaire philanthropist was not used to being challenged so directly, especially not on what was supposed to be friendly territory. "Oh, I understand complexity," Colbert retorted, pulling out a thick folder of papers. "I understand that you've managed to position yourself as the world's health expert despite having no medical training whatsoever. I understand that you've influenced global health policy while building a business empire around the solutions you promote. That's pretty complex, don't you think?" The host's aggressive questioning was relentless, and Gates was beginning to show signs of real frustration. The Microsoft founder tried to regain control of the narrative, launching into a detailed explanation of the foundation's governance structure and ethical guidelines. But Colbert cut him off mid-sentence, clearly not interested in allowing Gates to deliver his talking points. "Let's talk about Africa," Colbert interrupted, his tone becoming even more confrontational. "You've spent billions supposedly helping the continent, but many of those countries are now more dependent on Western aid than ever before. How do you explain that?" Gates's jaw tightened visibly as he processed the question. This was territory he was not prepared to navigate, especially not in front of millions of viewers. "I think you're oversimplifying a very complex situation," he managed to say, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The billionaire, who was accustomed to being treated with deference, was clearly struggling with the hostile environment Colbert had created. "Am I oversimplifying, or are you overcomplicating?" Colbert pressed on, his attack becoming more personal. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you've created a system where you get to play savior while maintaining the very power structures that create the problems you claim to solve. That's not philanthropy, that's public relations with a tax write-off." The audience was now completely silent, watching this verbal sparring match unfold with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. The tension in the studio was reaching a breaking point as Gates struggled to maintain his composure under the relentless questioning. Gates finally snapped, his carefully maintained public persona cracking under the pressure of Colbert's relentless assault. "You know what, Stephen? I didn't come here to be lectured by a comedian who thinks he understands global health policy," Gates said, his voice sharp with anger. "Maybe you should stick to making jokes instead of pretending to be an investigative journalist." The insult hung in the air as the audience gasped audibly, shocked by the billionaire's sudden aggression toward their beloved host. Colbert's eyes lit up with a dangerous gleam, clearly energized by Gates's outburst. "Oh, so now I'm just a comedian? That's rich coming from someone who appointed himself as the world's health czar without any qualifications," he fired back, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied smirk. "At least I'm honest about what I do for a living. Can you say the same?" The host was clearly enjoying watching the usually composed tech mogul lose his cool on national television. "You want to talk about honesty?" Gates's voice was rising now, his face flushed with indignation. "Let's talk about how you sit in your ivory tower making jokes while real people are dying from preventable diseases. At least I'm actually trying to make a difference instead of just throwing stones from the sidelines." The billionaire's hands were gesturing wildly as he spoke, his usual measured delivery replaced by raw emotion. But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, Gates's emotional response seemed to fuel his aggressive questioning. "Making a difference or making a profit?" he shot back, pulling out another document from his research pile. "Because according to this report, every major health initiative you've funded has somehow benefited companies in your investment portfolio. That's not coincidence. That's strategy." The host's voice was calm and controlled, a stark contrast to his increasingly agitated guest. "That's a gross oversimplification of how global health funding works," Gates protested, but his voice was losing its authority. The man who was used to commanding boardrooms and addressing world leaders was being systematically dismantled by a late-night television host. "You're cherry-picking data to support a narrative that simply isn't true." But even as he said it, Gates seemed to realize how defensive he sounded. Colbert sensed his advantage and pressed harder. "Cherry-picking? These are your own foundation's tax filings, Bill. I'm not making this up. I'm reading your own documents," he said, waving the papers in the air. "Unless you're telling me that your own foundation is lying in their federal filings?" The question was a rhetorical trap, and Gates knew it. Either he had to admit to the connections Colbert was highlighting, or suggest his own organization was committing fraud. The billionaire's composure was completely shattered now, his carefully crafted public image dissolving in real time. "You know what? This is ridiculous," Gates said, starting to remove his microphone. "I came here in good faith to discuss important global issues, and instead you're ambushing me with conspiracy theories and tabloid journalism." His movements were sharp and angry as he fumbled with the microphone clip, clearly preparing to leave. But Colbert wasn't finished with him yet. "Conspiracy theories? Is that what we're calling investigative journalism now?" the host asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. "I'm sorry that asking tough questions about your business practices makes you uncomfortable, but maybe that discomfort is telling us something important." The audience was completely riveted, watching this unprecedented confrontation unfold before their eyes. "You want to know what's telling?" Gates shot back, his voice now fully raised. What's telling is that you ambush your guests instead of having honest conversations. What's telling is that you'd rather score cheap points than actually discuss solutions to real problems. The billionaire was on his feet now, his face red with anger as he glared down at his host. This isn't journalism, it's a hit job. Colbert remained seated, his calm demeanor making Gates's outburst look even more unhinged by comparison. A hit job? I'm literally reading from public documents and asking you to explain your own actions, he said with infuriating reasonableness. If that feels like an attack, maybe the problem isn't with the questions, maybe it's with the answers. The host's measured response only seemed to infuriate Gates further, who was now pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. You know what the problem is? Gates said, pointing an accusatory finger at Colbert. The problem is people like you who tear down anyone trying to make a positive impact in the world. You sit here in your comfortable studio making jokes while people are actually out there doing the hard work of solving problems. His voice was shaking with rage, and spittle was forming at the corners of his mouth as he spoke. The confrontation had moved far beyond professional disagreement into personal territory, and the studio audience was watching in stunned silence. Colbert stood up slowly, finally matching Gates's aggressive posture as the confrontation reached its climax. Hard work? Is that what you call manipulating global health policy to benefit your investment portfolio? He asked, his voice still, maddeningly calm despite the escalating tension. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've figured out how to profit from human suffering while convincing everyone you're a saint. The accusation was devastating in its simplicity, and Gates looked like he had been physically slapped. That's it. I'm done with this garbage, Gates exploded, ripping off his remaining microphone equipment and throwing it down on the chair. You want to spread lies and conspiracy theories? Do it without me. This is exactly the kind of irresponsible journalism that's destroying public trust in institutions. The billionaire's voice was hoarse with rage as he prepared to storm off the set, but Colbert wasn't finished with him yet. Destroying trust in institutions? Colbert called out as Gates started walking toward the exit. Or exposing how those institutions actually work. Maybe the problem isn't that people are losing trust. Maybe the problem is that they're finally seeing what that trust was built on. The host's words followed Gates as he stalked across the stage, his expensive suit wrinkled and his composure completely shattered. But Gates stopped dead in his tracks, turning back toward Colbert with fire in his eyes. You want to know what trust is built on? He shouted, his voice echoing through the silent studio. Trust is built on results. Trust is built on actually saving lives instead of just talking about it. Trust is built on putting your money where your mouth is instead of hiding behind jokes and sarcasm. The billionaire was gesticulating wildly, completely abandoning any pretense of media training or public relations coaching. My money where my mouth is? Colbert laughed, a sound that cut through the tension like a knife. Bill, your money is literally everywhere your mouth is. That's the whole point. You can't separate your philanthropy from your profit because they're the same thing. The host's observation was so cutting that several audience members actually gasped audibly, shocked by the brutal honesty of the exchange. Gates's face went from red to purple as he processed the accusation. You have no idea what you're talking about, he sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. The man who had built one of the world's largest fortunes through strategic thinking was being outmaneuvered by a television comedian, and everyone in the studio could see it happening. You're just another media parasite feeding off other people's success. The insult was the final straw for Colbert, who had maintained his composure throughout the entire confrontation. Media parasite? He said, his voice finally showing some real anger. At least I don't disguise my parasitism as charity. At least I don't pretend that making money off human misery is actually helping people. At least I'm honest about being in the entertainment business instead of cosplaying as a humanitarian. The response was so perfectly crafted that it left Gates speechless for several long seconds. This is insane, Gates finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He was losing an argument, on national television to a comedian, and there was no graceful way to recover. I don't have to listen to this nonsense from someone who contributes nothing to society except cynicism and cheap laughs. But even as he said it, Gates seemed to realize how petty and defensive he sounded. Security guards were now approaching the stage, clearly called by the show's producers, who had finally decided the situation was beyond salvage. But Colbert held up a hand to stop them, wanting to let this confrontation play out to its natural conclusion. "Contributing nothing to society?" he asked with mock hurt. "Bill, I'm providing a public service right here, right now. I'm showing people what happens when someone actually asks you tough questions, instead of just accepting your carefully crafted image." Gates looked around the studio, suddenly seeming to realize that hundreds of people were watching his public meltdown unfold in real time. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of his breakdown for posterity. "You know what? Keep your show," he said finally, his voice deflated and bitter. "Keep your audience of people who would rather tear down successful individuals than build anything themselves. I'm done wasting my time with this circus." With that final insult, Bill Gates stormed off the stage, leaving Stephen Colbert standing, alone at his desk as the audience sat in stunned silence. The host straightened his tie, smoothed his hair, and looked directly into the camera with a satisfied smile. "Well, folks, I guess that's what happens when you ask a billionaire to explain how he makes his billions," he said with a shrug. "We'll be right back after this commercial break, assuming our legal department doesn't shut us down first." The confrontation was over, but the implications would reverberate far beyond the walls of the television studio. A carefully constructed public image had been shattered in real time, and millions of viewers had witnessed something they would never forget. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Drop a comment below with your thoughts on what really happened between these two powerful figures. And don't forget to subscribe for more shocking celebrity encounters that the mainstream media doesn't want you to see.